Hands up! Step away from the door, now!
Officer, I own this building. My name is on that wall. Check my ID.
I don't care who you say you are, you're trespassing.
You're about to arrest the wrong man. Look at my
Turn
wall.
around! Stop resisting!
I am not resisting. This is a mistake that will end your career.
Officer Kyle Rourke had been patrolling the streets of Chicago for 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the city of Chicago $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, a man who prided himself on his instincts on being a wolf in a city of sheep, but who had fundamentally misunderstood the difference between policing and predation. On a crisp Sunday morning in the financial district, Rourke received a dispatch call regarding a suspect attempting to breach a secure building. The suspect in question was Marcus Sterling, a 56-year-old legal titan and the managing partner of Sterling, Vance & Halloway, one of the most prestigious defense firms in the Midwest. What Rourke did next, ignoring the man's bespoke suit, dismissing his calm demeanor, and arresting him on the steps of the very skyscraper he owned a controlling interest in, would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias blinds law enforcement to reality. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic failure of judgment, where are you watching from today? If you appreciate hearing the stories that hold power accountable, please hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep digging for the truth. The offices of Sterling, Vance & Halloway occupy the top 4 floors of a steel and glass monolith on West Wacker Drive. It is the kind of building that radiates power, reflecting the gray waters of the Chicago River. On weekdays, the lobby is a hive of commerce filled with traders, corporate lawyers, and consultants. But it was 9:00 a.m. on a Sunday in October. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional jogger or tourist. The morning sun was bright, cutting through the autumn chill. Marcus Sterling had driven in from his home in Hyde Park to review depositions for a class-action lawsuit starting Monday. He parked his vintage Mercedes in the executive garage, but in his haste to enjoy the morning air, he had walked around to the front plaza to grab a coffee from a nearby vendor before heading up. Sterling was a man of routines and precision. At 56, he had built a reputation as a fierce litigator and a community pillar. He served on the board of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and mentored young law students from underrepresented communities. He was dressed in a charcoal wool coat over a navy suit, an attire that cost more than most people's cars. He walked with the confidence of a man who not only belonged in the financial district, but helped shape it. However, upon returning to the building's main entrance with his coffee, he reached into his pocket and realized his security keycard was still sitting on his dresser at home. It was a minor inconvenience. He knew the weekend security protocol. He would simply wave to the desk guard, show his ID, and be buzzed in. He had done it a dozen times before. But today, the regular weekend guard, a man named Jerry, who had known Sterling for a decade, was out sick. Sitting at the console was someone new, and to this new set of eyes, Marcus Sterling wasn't a managing partner. He was just a black man trying to get into a building where he didn't look like he belonged. Elias Thorne was 32 years old and had been working for the private security firm contracted by the building for only 3 weeks. He was a man who viewed his job not as a service role, but as the first line of defense against a chaotic world. He took his uniform too seriously, policed the lobby with an air of unearned authority, and harbored deep-seated suspicions about anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of a corporate tenant. When he looked up from his monitors and saw a black man standing at the glass revolving doors, peering in and tapping on the glass, Thorne didn't see a tenant locked out. He saw a threat. He saw a vagrant or a scam artist trying to slip in on a Sunday when the building was empty. Sterling tapped on the glass again, holding up his driver's license to the camera, mouthing the words, "I work here. I forgot my key." He smiled a patient, tight-lipped smile that he used often in court when a judge was being particularly obtuse. He pointed to the directory on the wall behind the guard's desk, specifically to the top line Sterling, Vance & Halloway. He pointed to himself. The connection should have been obvious. But Thorne wasn't interested in connections. He was interested in enforcement. He picked up the intercom handset, but didn't buzz the door. "Building is closed. No unauthorized entry. Thorne's voice crackled through the external speaker. I'm Marcus Sterling. The man outside replied, his voice calm and resonant. I'm the managing partner of the law firm on the 40th floor. My name is on the wall behind you. I just need you to check the tenant list. Thorne didn't turn around to look at the wall. He stared at the man. I don't have you on my schedule for weekend access. You need to leave the premises. I don't need to be on a schedule, son. I own the lease. Just call the firm's emergency line if you need verification, or look at the ID I'm holding up. Sir, if you don't step away from the door, I'm calling the police. We have a zero-tolerance policy for loitering and attempted breach. Sterling sighed, checking his watch. He had a brief due at 8:00 a.m. the next day. He didn't have time for this. I am not loitering. I am trying to go to work. Please call your supervisor. Call Jerry. He knows me. That was the trigger for Thorne. The suggestion that he, Elias Thorne, didn't know how to do his job or that he needed to check with someone else bruised his fragile ego. He decided right then that he wasn't letting this man in. In fact, he was going to make an example of him. Thorne picked up his mobile phone and dialed 911. This is security at 150 West Wacker. I have a male subject, African-American, roughly 50 years old, attempting to force entry into the lobby. He's becoming aggressive and refusing to leave. I need a unit immediately. The dispatcher logged the call, attempted break-in commercial high-rise subject uncooperative. The nuance of attempting to force entry versus standing at the door asking to be let in was lost in translation. Officer Kyle Rourke picked up the call. Show me en route, he said, flipping on his lights. Do you think security guards who make false reports based on bias should be held criminally liable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Kyle Rourke had a personnel file that read like a warning label the department had chosen to ignore. In his 6 years on the force, he had accrued 14 complaints. Most were for discourtesy, but 5 were for excessive use of force, and 3 specifically alleged racial profiling during stops. He was a product of the warrior cop mentality training that taught officers they were constantly under siege, that every civilian was a potential combatant, and that hesitation was fatal. His supervisors knew he was a problem. His sergeant had written 2 separate memos advising that Rourke needed calibration regarding community interactions. But in a department short on manpower and strong on union protections, Rourke stayed on the street. He was considered proactive, a euphemism for an officer who generated arrest numbers regardless of the quality or legality of those arrests. As Rourke sped toward Wacker Drive, his mind was already constructing the scenario. Sunday morning, downtown, break-in. It was probably a homeless individual trying to find a place to sleep or a thief looking for unattended electronics. The idea that it might be a misunderstanding never crossed his mind. The dispatcher had said, attempting to force entry, and Rourke took that as gospel. He arrived at the scene at 9:12 a.m., screeching his patrol SUV to a halt in the bus lane directly in front of the building. He exited the vehicle adjusting his utility belt, his hand resting instinctively near his holster. He saw Marcus Sterling standing by the revolving doors, still holding his coffee cup, looking at his phone. To Rourke, the very posture of the man was an affront. Sterling wasn't cowering. He wasn't running. He was standing there with an air of ownership. Rourke interpreted this confidence not as innocence, but as defiance. He marched up the concrete steps, his voice booming before he even reached the top. Step away from the door. Let's see some hands. Sterling looked up, startled not by the command, but by the volume. He saw the young officer storming toward him, face red, jaw clenched. Sterling lowered his phone slowly, keeping his hands visible. Officer, I'm glad you're here. We have a misunderstanding with the guard. I said step away from the door, Rourke barked, closing the distance aggressively. He moved into Sterling's personal space, a tactic designed to provoke a reaction. Get your back against the wall, now. Officer, there is no need for shouting, Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, the courtroom voice that had dismantled hostile witnesses for 30 years. I am Marcus Sterling. I work in this building. I am the managing partner of the law firm upstairs. I simply forgot my keycard. Rourke didn't hear him. Or rather, he heard the words, but his brain refused to process them. In Rourke's world, people who looked like Marcus Sterling didn't own skyscrapers. They didn't run law firms. They were suspects. "I don't care who you say you are. The guard called and said you're trying to break in. That's trespassing. That's attempted burglary." "It is not burglary to enter my own property," Sterling said, turning slightly to point at the brass plaque mounted on the stone pillar next to the door. It listed the building's primary tenants. "Read that sign. Sterling, Vance, and Halloway. I am the Sterling." "Turn around," Rourke shouted, grabbing Sterling's shoulder and spinning him. Coffee sloshed out of the cup, splashing onto Sterling's expensive coat and the officer's boots. "You just assaulted a police officer," Rourke snarled, seizing the accident as justification. "That's it. You're done." "I did not assault you," Sterling said, wincing as Rourke wrenched his arm behind his back. "You pushed me. I am cooperating. I am asking you to look at my identification, which is in my pocket." "Stop resisting," Rourke yelled, playing to the body camera he knew was recording, creating a verbal narrative that contradicted the physical reality. Sterling wasn't resisting. He was standing still, his body rigid with shock and indignation, but he wasn't fighting. "I am not resisting," Sterling stated clearly, ensuring his words would be picked up by the microphone. "I am Marcus Sterling. My wallet is in my left interior pocket. It contains my driver's license and my Illinois Bar Association card. If you arrest me, you are making a mistake that will end your career." That statement, the assertion of power by the black man he was manhandling, incensed Rourke. It challenged his authority, his worldview. He kicked Sterling's legs apart, forcing him to lean forward against the cold glass of the lobby window. Inside, Elias Thorne watched with a smirk, feeling vindicated. He had called the cavalry, and the cavalry was taking out the trash. "You want to threaten me?" Rourke huffed, pulling his handcuffs from his belt. "You can tell the judge all about your career." "I am the judge's college roommate," Sterling muttered, though Rourke missed it. The metal cuffs ratcheted tight around Sterling's wrists. The pain was sharp. Sterling had rotator cuff issues from years of tennis, and the angle was brutal. "Officer, please loosen the cuffs. You are injuring me." "They're not for comfort," Rourke snapped. He spun Sterling around. "You're under arrest for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest." At that moment, a taxi pulled up to the curb. 2 young women and a man stepped out carrying briefcases. They were junior associates at Sterling, Vance, and Halloway, coming in for the same Sunday deposition prep. They stopped dead in their tracks. They saw the flashing lights. They saw the aggressive officer. And then they saw the man in the handcuffs. "Oh my God!" One of the associates, a young woman named Sarah, gasped. "That's Mr. Sterling." She ran up the steps, dropping her bag. "Officer, stop. What are you doing?" Rourke turned his hand, dropping to his taser. Back up, or you're next." "You're arresting our boss," the male associate shouted, holding up his hands but stepping forward. "That is Marcus Sterling. He runs this firm. He works here." "I don't care who he is," Rourke screamed now, fully committed to the disaster. "He refused a lawful order. Back away." "Sarah, record this," Sterling said calmly. He was pale, the pain in his shoulder visible in his eyes, but his mind was sharp. "Do not interfere physically. Just record everything. Get his badge number. Get the car number." Sarah already had her phone out. The other associate was recording too. They captured the image of one of Chicago's most prominent legal minds being shoved toward a patrol car like a common criminal. They captured Rourke's red face, his screaming his refusal to look at the ID Sterling was begging him to check. "You are making a mistake," Sarah yelled. "He has identification. Just look at his wallet. I said back off." Rourke shoved Sterling into the back seat of the cruiser. Sterling had to duck his head awkwardly to avoid hitting the door frame because Rourke didn't guide him. The door slammed shut. Inside the car, the silence was deafening. Sterling closed his eyes, controlling his breathing. He was cataloging every second. The tightness of the cuffs, the lack of Miranda rights, the refusal to investigate, the fabricated charge of resistance. He wasn't just a victim. He was a lawyer building a case file in his head. Rourke climbed into the front seat, adrenaline pumping. He felt powerful. He had neutralized the threat. He picked up his radio. 1 under. Uncooperative. Transporting to the 1st District. As he pulled away from the curb, leaving the stunned associates standing on the sidewalk, Rourke glanced in the rearview mirror. "You guys always have an excuse," he muttered. "Always someone important. Always innocent." Sterling opened his eyes. He looked at the back of the officer's head. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what was waiting at the 1st District. Should officers be required to verify identification before making an arrest for trespassing in non-violent situations? Drop your opinion below. The drive to the station took 10 minutes. Rourke dragged Sterling out of the car and marched him through the back entrance of the precinct, parading his collar into the processing area. The station was relatively quiet on a Sunday morning. Behind the high desk sat Sergeant Thomas Miller, a 58-year-old veteran who had been on the force for 30 years. Miller was counting down the days to retirement. He had seen everything. He knew every player in the city's justice system. Rourke pushed Sterling toward the bench. Trespassing at 150 West Wacker. Resisting. Assault on an officer. Miller looked up over his reading glasses. He saw the expensive coat. He saw the quality of the suit. Then he looked at the face. Miller froze. He blinked, thinking perhaps his eyes were playing tricks on him. He stood up slowly. "Rourke," Miller said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Who is this?" "Some guy trying to break into the office building. Claimed he owned the place. Refused to leave." Miller walked around the desk. He didn't look at Rourke. He looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling. Marcus Sterling." "Hello, Sergeant," Sterling said politely. "I believe we met at the Police Benevolent Association dinner last year. I was the keynote speaker." The color drained from Rourke's face. It didn't just fade, it vanished. He looked from his sergeant to the prisoner. "You arrested Marcus Sterling?" Miller asked, turning to Rourke, his voice rising to a roar. "You arrested the head of the Civil Rights Commission's advisory board for trespassing at his own damn office?" He didn't have ID," Rourke stammered. "He told you to check his wallet," Miller yelled. "Did you check his wallet?" He was resisting." "I was not resisting, Sergeant," Sterling interjected calmly. "I have 2 witnesses and video evidence that will confirm I stood perfectly still. This officer refused to verify my identity, used excessive force, and arrested me because he didn't believe a black man could be a managing partner." Miller pulled a key from his belt and unlocked the cuffs himself. "Mr. Sterling, I cannot apologize enough. I don't even have words." Sterling rubbed his wrists. They were bruised and swelling. "I want his badge number, Sergeant. I want the Bodycam footage secured immediately, and I want to speak to the commander." "You'll get all of that," Miller said. He turned to Rourke. "Gun and badge, on the desk. Now." "Sarge, come on, I was just—" "Now!" Miller screamed. "You are done. Go sit in the interrogation room and don't you dare say a word to anyone until Internal Affairs gets here." The aftermath was swift, brutal, and public. By noon, the video shot by the junior associates was on every local news channel. By 5:00 p.m., it was national. The image of Marcus Sterling, a man who had spent his life defending the law, being manhandled by a young officer who assumed he was a criminal, struck a nerve across the country. The security guard Elias Thorne was fired before the end of the day. The security company issued a statement condemning his actions, but they were promptly sued for negligence and discriminatory practices. Thorne would never work in security again. Officer Kyle Rourke was suspended indefinitely. The investigation was not the usual slow walk of police bureaucracy. With Sterling involved, the pressure was immense. The body camera footage was released within 48 hours. It showed Rourke's aggression, his refusal to listen, and Sterling's absolute compliance. Rourke was terminated 3 weeks later. He was charged with official misconduct and battery charges that are rarely brought against officers, but were unavoidable given the evidence and the victim. The city of Chicago settled the civil rights lawsuit filed by Sterling for $6.5 million. Sterling announced that every cent of the settlement after legal fees would go toward funding a new legal clinic dedicated to victims of police misconduct and racial profiling. But the money didn't fix the memory. Months later, Marcus Sterling returned to work. He walked through the same lobby. The new security guards greeted him by name, standing up straight, terrified of making a mistake. He nodded to them, polite as always. But as he stood in the elevator rising to the 40th floor, his hand trembled slightly, a tremor that hadn't been there before. He realized that despite his money, his status, his education, and his name on the building to men like Kyle Rourke and Elias Thorne, he was never a managing partner. He was just a body to be controlled, a suspect to be subdued. Justice was served in the courtroom, but the scar on reality remained. If it could happen to him on the steps of his own empire, what hope did a teenager in a hoodie have on a dark street corner? That is the question that keeps Marcus Sterling awake at night. And it's the question we should all be asking. If you believe that law enforcement requires fundamental reform to root out this kind of bias, please like this video and share it. These stories need to be told until they stop happening. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.